The Chinese Communist Party held its long-delayed Third Plenum this week. The Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party holds 7 plenums over the course of its 5-year term. Anticipated economic challenges in the Chinese economy delayed the Third Plenum, which focused on long-term economic matters, from taking place in 2023. These challenges included deflation, an overvalued and troubled property market, and elevated government debt, particularly at the local level, among other pressing issues. Typically, the plenum prioritizes a longer view of China's economic goals over short-term issues or prescriptive policies. Disagreements among the Central Committee over long-term goals and whether to address pressing short-term issues led to the delay in the plenum. The public statement of the plenum left a lot to be desired as it accepted slower economic growth, but the focus on China's need for self-sufficiency in science and technology gives insight into a pressing issue in China. The plenum concluded that China must accept slower growth as the future norm. The overwhelming macroeconomic issues of government debt, on and off balance sheets, the housing crisis, and President Xi Jinping's desire to reduce the role of a free market in Chinese society have already predicted this outcome. We expect President Xi to introduce more central control measures, which will lead to slower economic growth. People agree that China's declaration of wanting to become more self-sufficient in science and technology is a response to the West and its allies starting to limit China's access to high-tech products like advanced silicon chips and semiconductors. The Chinese rejection of a rules-based order, such as its illegal claims in the South China Sea, its support of Russia in the Ukraine war, and its bellicose threats to invade China, have caused the West and its supporters to reduce China's access to these advanced products. The national aspiration for self-sufficiency in science and technology aims to prevent outside forces from hindering China's progress toward becoming the preeminent power by denying it access to advanced modern technology. Beyond the Chinese desire for self-sufficiency in science and technology, it also serves as a goal for China, independent of any geopolitical disputes with the West and its allies. China's population is in a demographic death spiral. China currently has 1.4 billion people, but is no longer the most populous country in the world. Since 2021, China's population has decreased by about 3 million, with an expected acceleration in this rate. As a result, China is no longer the world's most populous country, as India overtook it in 2022 to become the world's most populous nation. More disturbing for China than the 3 million person decline in population is that its population is also growing older. The Chinese labor pool has shrunk from 747 million in 2021 to 734 million in 2022, and we expect this trend to continue in 2023 and 2024. China's competitive advantage on its rise to becoming an economic superpower was its cheap and abundant labor to manufacture products that were cheaper than most of the developed world. As the potential labor pool shrinks, the relative cost of labor rises, and this is something that India hopes to leverage with its younger population to provide labor relatively cheaper than China. India is in the process of positioning itself as an alternative to China. How did China end up in this position? Communist dogma asserts that humans possess the ability to create utopias, achieving the perfection of a socialist state. The 1970s saw China's enormous population as a hindrance to achieving a utopian state. This was also a period when leaders and scientists were concerned about overpopulation in the world. The Chinese communist leaders decided to implement the one-child policy as a way to reduce the growth rate in China. Slowing the population growth rate would allow natural resources and capital to stretch further, alleviating the expected pressure on food production to feed the population. Population control would help Chinese leaders take these savings and improve economic growth by moving resources into something other than maintaining a massive population and all the infrastructure that goes with it. The communist leadership, despite their best efforts, was not able to eliminate the traditional cultural beliefs of the Chinese people, especially the rural people, who were the majority of the population. The Chinese leadership also embarked on a program of urbanization to move the population to cities to harness human capital and make it easier to control. The result was the greatest reduction in population growth. In 1950, the average fertility rate was 5.8 children per woman. and when the one-child policy went into effect in 1980, the rate had already fallen to 2.7 per woman. The birth rate continued to decline over the next 4 decades, reaching 100.8 per woman by 2016, when the one-child policy gave way to the two-child policy in an attempt to slow the potential population decline. The three-child policy's implementation did not alleviate this situation, as the birth rate plummeted to 1.2 per woman. The accepted birth rate to keep a population in a steady state is 2.1, and China was not far below this rate. Urbanization also played a role. In rural parts of a country, having more children is considered desirable because it provides more labor to the family that is most likely involved in farming. Larger families provide more labor for farming. However, in an urban setting, having more children can be costly, particularly when the family likely works in a factory, government, or administrative job, and a child offers no additional benefits beyond tradition, a value that Marxist society does not appreciate. The other consideration is that having a firstborn boy means that they can carry on the family line according to traditional Chinese beliefs. Boys are also considered to have the responsibility to care for their parents in old age, whereas a daughter is not responsible for her parents once she marries. Due to the government's mandate of only one child per family, parents desired a boy to continue the family line and care for them in their old age. The outcome led to parents either discarding their firstborn daughters or opting to terminate the pregnancy if the child turned out to be a girl. The result is that in China, there are 105 males for every 100 females, which represents a significant shift in the natural distribution patterns of male-to-female ratios. But this shift only applies to the total population. When looking at the younger population, the distribution gets much worse, with the 15-19 age group showing a distribution of 116 males to every 100 females. It is estimated that China accounted for over 25% of all abortions worldwide due to the implementation of government policy, such as forcing women to abort if they already had a child or voluntary abortion if a female was identified in the womb. Urbanization, traditional beliefs, and the one-child policy have been disastrous for China. Abortion was a tool of government enforcement policy, or a reaction by a family when government policy contradicted traditional Chinese beliefs, which led China to a birth rate of 1.2 per female and was only going to trigger population decline. As a result, China is already experiencing a population decline, and we expect this to accelerate further. We expect China's population to decline from 1.4 billion to 767 million by the end of the 21st century, with upper bounds of 1.2 billion and lower bounds of 468 million. The consensus is that China will be half the size of 2022. The declining population, labor force, and President Xi's desire to add regulation to the Chinese economy all increase the cost of doing business in China. The long-term economic picture for China is not bleak, but it is not favorable either. The general consensus among China watchers is that the Central Committee failed to implement bold policies that could have bolstered the Chinese economy, but this perspective may be overly simplistic. Given the rapid population decline, which China cannot reverse no matter how many children it allows, and the fact that slowing economic growth de-incentives children in an urban environment, China's desire to focus on science and technology could potentially slow its economic decline. In economics, there are 3 factors of production: land, labor, and capital. Land and labor were in abundance in China, giving them a competitive economic advantage when compared to the rest of the world, but especially in labor. This will not be the case going forward, as the relative price of labor will only rise and continue to rise in a declining population in a country that relies on international trade for its economic viability. President Xi's emphasis on science and technology would fall under the capital factor of production, and increased capital investment could reduce the need for a large labor pool and re-establish the competitive nature of Chinese international trade. This is all theoretical, as China is under a communist government that is re-embracing the need to add more centralization in the sector of the economy that is most productive. It is doubtful that this type of economy and its leaders can meet the needs of China and its falling population, as the reduced labor pool and the rise of other developing nations displace China's role as the factory of the world. we can expect the standards of living in China to start falling. Chinese society will also be unstable, as a large portion of Chinese men will not be able to marry and raise families as part of a traditional Chinese culture. The Chinese communist system requires stability and societal order, and the policies that China has adopted and enforced have created a long-term situation that will endanger both of those requirements. Therefore, China can become more dangerous as it seeks a way out of its predicament or decides to invade Taiwan and face the US, while it is still demographically and economically strong. Other options include overthrowing the communist system and improving the situation, but this is unlikely to happen peacefully. While slow birth rates are common in the developed world, the world should learn from China's example of what not to do.